I'm standing backstage at Aldridge University while half the campus is screaming my name, and all I can think is, we were supposed to pretend this meant nothing. Because everyone is replaying on their phones, the one they're slowing down and zooming in on like it was planned down to the second was supposed to be fake. A stunt. A joke that would end the moment the lights cut out. But my hands are still shaking, and not because of the stage. Because I can still feel her. People are cheering like this was clever. Like it was satire. Like we just embarrassed the rivalry and can all go back to normal. But nothing in my body believes that. And the worst part is I knew this was dangerous long before we ever stepped on that stage. At Aldridge, rivalry isn't drama. It's tradition. There are two student organizations that matter here. Two names that open doors. Two sides that control funding, influence, and whose voices get taken seriously. People inherit loyalty the way they inherit last names. You don't cross lines. You don't mix. And you definitely don't make a spectacle out of it unless you're ready to lose something. I didn't join my organization because I believed in it. I joined because it came with a scholarship and a safety net. Because it was practical. Because I needed it to survive here. That's the kind of person I've always been. Quiet. Careful. Someone who learned early that attention comes with a price. I survived by staying invisible when things got heated. By keeping my head down. By not becoming a problem anyone needed to solve. Vera Lang was the opposite of that. Even if you didn't know her personally, you knew her presence. The way people paused when she spoke. The way decisions seemed to orbit her. She didn't avoid conflict, she organized it. She belonged exactly where she was. Which is why the first time I heard her name attached to mine, my stomach dropped. It happened during a late-night planning session, one of those half-serious, half-exhausted conversations where people start pitching ideas they'd never say out loud in daylight. Someone joked that the rivalry had become embarrassing. Someone else said it needed to be exposed for how ridiculous it was. Then someone laughed and said, "What if we staged a Romeo and Juliet moment? A kiss. One moment. Two sides crossing lines on stage." Everyone laughed. Then everyone went quiet. Because the idea didn't sound impossible. My name came up because I was quiet, non-threatening, easy to control, someone who wouldn't turn it into something messy. Vera volunteered because she never backed down from spectacle. When she approached me later, it wasn't reckless. It wasn't flirtatious. It was calm. One moment, she said. On stage. Controlled. Symbolic. Then it's over. I remember nodding even though my chest felt tight. I didn't trust attention. I didn't trust her confidence. But I trusted myself even less to challenge the momentum of people who knew how to command rooms. So I agreed. I told myself it was just a performance. Just a kiss. Just a moment that wouldn't follow us afterward. Standing backstage now, hearing the crowd chant like we'd started something worth watching, I finally understand what my mistake was. I thought the danger was the kiss. It wasn't. The danger was agreeing to pretend something mattered less than it did. The plan became real the moment Vera Lang looked at me and didn't smile. Not the charming, public-facing smile everyone knew, the other one. The focused one. The look she wore when she'd already decided something and was checking whether the world would cooperate. We were standing outside the student center, the night air cool enough to make excuses for lingering. She spoke like this was business, not risk. One moment, she said again, slower this time. On stage. A kiss. Then we walk away. I nodded because nodding was easier than asking the questions I was already afraid of. What if it doesn't land? I asked. What if people take it the wrong way? Vera tilted her head, studying me. They already take everything the wrong way, she said. This just gives them something obvious to be wrong about. That should have been my second warning. She framed it like satire, like social commentary, like we were exposing how ridiculous the feud had become by performing it too loudly to ignore. "Nothing about this has to be personal," she added. "You don't even have to look at me afterward." I almost laughed at that, because I'd already noticed how hard it was not to look at her when she was this close, how her confidence didn't feel like arrogance, just certainty. Like she'd never needed to ask for permission to take up space. I'd spent my entire life doing the opposite. "I don't want this to spiral," I said carefully. "It won't," she replied. "I'll handle it." That sentence settled something inside me. I didn't realize how tired I was of handling things myself until someone offered to take control. That's the part one don't like admitting now. I didn't agree because I believed in the message. I agreed because she sounded sure. And when you're someone who's learned to survive by shrinking, certainty feels like shelter. We talked logistics, timing, placement, how long the kiss would last. She treated it like choreography, clean, precise, rehearsable. No room for interpretation. I asked her why she volunteered. She shrugged. Someone had to. That was Vera, always stepping forward before anyone could question her right to. I didn't ask why she chose me. I already knew. Because I wouldn't complicate it. Because I wouldn't demand meaning. Because I wouldn't turn a stunt into a story. At least, that's what everyone assumed, including me. The days leading up to the showcase felt unreal. People buzzed with anticipation, half aware that something different was coming, but not knowing what shape it would take. Vera and I didn't rehearse the kiss. That was her idea. "Better if it looks unplanned," she said. I didn't push back. Every time I thought about it, my chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with stage fright. We barely spoke in public, barely acknowledged each other in private. It was like we were pretending distance would keep things clean, but distance only made the moment heavier. The night before the showcase, I couldn't sleep. I told myself I was nervous about the crowd, about the fallout, about becoming visible in a way I couldn't undo. I didn't let myself consider the other possibility, that I was afraid of how it would feel. Because once you imagine that, you can't pretend it's just performance anymore. When the night finally arrived, the campus felt charged. Lights strung high, music too loud. People packed together like they could sense something was about to break. Backstage, Vera stood beside me, calm as ever. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. Of course I did. She reached out then, not to touch me, not yet, but to straighten the sleeve of my jacket. The gesture was brief, professional, but my pulse jumped anyway. "Remember," she said quietly, "it ends when we step off stage." I nodded again. I wanted to believe her, because if she was right, this would be simple. One kiss, one moment, then nothing. And I wouldn't have to ask myself why the idea of nothing suddenly felt like loss. The moment we stepped on stage, I knew we'd miscalculated. Not the lights, not the crowd, not even the noise. It was the way the room leaned toward us. There's a sound people make when they expect something, anticipation with teeth. Phones rose like reflexes. The applause didn't wait for a cue. It arrived early, hungry, already convinced we were about to give them a story worth keeping. Vera walked beside me like this was exactly where she belonged. I tried to match her pace, tried to breathe normally, tried not to think about how my name was being shouted by people who had never noticed me before tonight. When she took my hand, the reaction was immediate. Gasps, laughter, that electric ripple that tells you something irreversible just happened in public. Her grip was steady, warm, not theatrical, real. That was the first crack in the plan. I was supposed to feel like I was performing, like I was acting out a beat we'd agreed on. Instead, my body reacted before my brain could remind it this wasn't personal. Vera turned toward me, her expression unreadable in the glare of the lights. For a split second, I wondered if she felt it too, that shift, that drop in the stomach that happens when something stops being hypothetical. We leaned in. The kiss was meant to be brief. It wasn't. I hesitated, not because I didn't want it, but because I suddenly understood I couldn't control what it would mean once it happened. That pause stretched the moment, turned it into something the audience could project onto. They roared. The sound washed over us, louder than I expected, louder than anything I'd ever stood inside. The cheers felt like pressure, like permission, like demand. Vera didn't pull away. Neither did I. For a heartbeat longer than planned, the world narrowed to just us, heat, breath, the shock of recognition hitting somewhere behind my ribs. It didn't feel dramatic. It felt disorienting. When we finally separated, the applause spiked again, triumphant. I forced a smile because that's what you do when people are watching. We finished the segment. We exited the stage. The lights cut. And the moment didn't end. Backstage, the noise faded to a dull echo, but my hands were still shaking. I told myself it was adrenaline. I told myself it was relief. Vera looked at me like she was recalibrating. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded automatically. We didn't talk about the kiss. Not then. We talked about logistics, timing, damage control. Who would say what if asked? She slipped back into control so smoothly I almost believed it had all been in my head. Almost. But when she brushed past me, her shoulder grazing mine, my breath caught. When she met my eyes for half a second too long, something unspoken passed between us. Not chemistry. Awareness. That was worse. The rest of the night blurred. People congratulated us. Laughed. Called it iconic. Brave. Necessary. I laughed back when expected. I nodded. I performed relief. Inside, something was splintering. Because here's the part no one warned me about. When something fake creates a real feeling, your brain scrambles to contain it. You start looking for explanations that don't require you to change anything. I told myself it was the crowd, the adrenaline, the pressure. I told myself anyone would have felt that. But when I closed my eyes later, alone, it wasn't the stage I remembered. It was the stillness right before the kiss. The way Vera hadn't rushed it. The way neither of us had. That hesitation wasn't part of the script. And that meant something had already gone wrong. Or right. I wasn't sure which yet. All I knew was this. If the kiss had truly been nothing, it wouldn't have followed me off stage. It wouldn't have replayed in the quiet moments. And it definitely wouldn't have made the idea of pretending it didn't matter feel impossible. The aftermath hit harder than the kiss ever did. Not immediately. Not all at once. It arrived in fragments, notifications, whispers, looks held half a second too long. By morning, clips were everywhere. Slowed down. Captioned. Analyzed like evidence. People arguing about intent like it was a crime scene. Satire, some said. Brilliant protest, others insisted. A betrayal, according to both sides. No one asked US. Leadership meetings were called before classes even started. Messages came in marked urgent. Words like damage control and stakeholders floated around like they were neutral, like they didn't mean consequences with names attached. Vera moved first. She always did. Publicly, she was flawless, measured statements, calm reassurances, a clean insistence that it had been performance. A symbolic act. Nothing personal. People listened. They always had. I tried to match her composure. I really did. I repeated the same lines when asked. Nodded at the right moments. Smiled when someone told me we'd handled it well. But the words felt borrowed in my mouth. Because the kiss wouldn't stay fake in my head. It replayed without permission in the quiet spaces between lectures when I was brushing my teeth or standing in line for coffee. Not the spectacle, not the crowd, the pause, the second where neither of us rushed away. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way Vera's voice softened when it was just us. The way her confidence slipped in private, like she was momentarily unsure what version of herself to use. The way she'd stop mid-sentence and look at me, like she was checking whether I was still there. We didn't talk about the kiss directly. We talked around it. Logistics. Optics. What to say if asked again. Who needed reassurance. Control. But every conversation felt like we were pretending the air wasn't charged between us. One night, after another meeting that went longer than it should have, Vera walked with me across campus. The lights were low, the paths quiet. "This will pass," she said, like she was convincing herself as much as me. I nodded. "Are you okay?" she asked. I opened my mouth, closed it, because I didn't know how to answer without changing everything. What scared me wasn't the backlash. It was how much I didn't want the moment to disappear. That realization sat heavy in my chest. I'd spent my whole life avoiding attention, avoiding disruption, avoiding anything that might force me to take up space I wasn't sure I deserved. And now I was standing inside something that demanded I acknowledge it. Vera tried to manage the narrative harder as the days went on. The more pressure mounted, the more tightly she held on. She wasn't cruel about it. She wasn't dismissive. She was afraid. That was new, and seeing it made everything more complicated, because it's one thing to push back against someone who's in control. It's another to realize they're losing it. The rivalry didn't explode the way people expected. It fractured instead. Awkward silences. Meetings that ended without resolution. People unsure which rules still applied. Nothing had been resolved. Everything had been disrupted. And in the middle of that, there was us, unlabeled, undefined, pretending we hadn't crossed something that couldn't be uncrossed. One afternoon, as we stood outside another closed-door discussion, Vera exhaled slowly and said, "I didn't expect this to follow us." "I did," I said, surprising myself. She looked at me. "I just didn't want it to," I added. That was the closest we came to honesty. For now. Because beneath the statements and the silence and the careful distance, something else was building quietly, insistently. A question neither of us had planned to ask. And pressure has a way of forcing answers, whether you're ready or not. The pressure didn't peak with a confrontation. It peaked with an email. Subject line, request for clarification. That was when I knew this wasn't just a mess anymore. It was a problem someone needed contained. Administrators got involved. Sponsors started asking questions that sounded polite but weren't. Meetings multiplied. Words like future implications and public perception were used the way people use gloves, so they don't have to touch the thing directly. Someone had to take responsibility. And by everyone's unspoken agreement, that someone was Vera. She was offered an out in a closed-door meeting I wasn't invited to. Distance yourself publicly. Reframe the moment. Preserve what you've built. I found out later, secondhand, from the way her shoulders held tension when she came out of the room. From the way she didn't immediately reach for her phone like she usually did. We walked together across campus without speaking. Finally, I asked, what did they want? She didn't answer right away. "They want this to be clean," she said eventually. "They want certainty." I nodded. And they want me to provide it. That was the first time she said me instead of we. I realized then how uneven this had always been. The kiss had implicated us both, but the consequences weren't being distributed equally. Vera had more to lose because she had more to begin with. Reputation. Access. A future that had already been sketched out in other people's expectations. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked young. Not unsure. Vera was never unsure, but tired. Like she was carrying the weight of a decision that didn't have aversion without loss. "They think it was a stunt that got out of hand," she said. "They want me to say that clearly. Publicly. And if you do?" I asked. She met my eyes. Held them. "It goes back to normal," she said. "Eventually." Normal. I thought about that word the entire night. Normal was the rivalry snapping back into place. Normal was silence where curiosity had been. Normal was the kiss becoming something people joked about in hindsight. Normal meant pretending nothing had shifted. I didn't tell her what I wanted her to do. I didn't ask her to protect me or to choose me or to make a statement that would cost her everything, because I knew what that would sound like. And because part of me understood something uncomfortable, this wasn't about choosing me. It was about choosing whether the moment mattered at all. The next day, Vera made her decision. She didn't confirm anything. She didn't deny anything either. She said less than everyone expected and more than they were prepared for. No statement, no explanation, no correction. She let the ambiguity stand. The reaction was immediate. People filled the silence with their own conclusions. Sponsors hesitated. Leadership grew tense. Allies distanced themselves. Vera's control, so carefully built, started to loosen. I watched it happen in real time, and in that moment, something settled in me. The kiss hadn't been fake because it was staged. It had been real because it demanded a choice, and Vera had answered it the only way she knew how, by refusing to erase it for the sake of comfort. We didn't talk much after that, not because there was anger between us, because there was respect, and maybe something more dangerous than either of us knew how to name yet. All I knew was this: whatever came next wouldn't be managed. It would have to be lived. The campus didn't explode the way people expected. It softened instead. Not into peace, nothing that clean, but into uncertainty. Meetings stopped producing conclusions. The rivalry didn't disappear, but it lost its edge, like a blade that had been dropped one too many times. People didn't know which rules still applied. And neither did I. The attention lingered longer than I wanted it to. Eyes followed me in places they hadn't before. Conversations paused when I entered rooms. For a while, it felt like I was wearing something visible I couldn't take off. The difference was I didn't fold. I learned how to endure being seen without apologizing for it. How to answer questions without shrinking. How to sit in silence without rushing to fill it just to make other people comfortable. That part shocked me. Vera changed too, though she would never call it that. Without full control, she moved differently. Slower. More deliberate. She still commanded rooms, but she listened now. Like she was learning what happened when she didn't rush to manage outcomes before they managed her. We didn't rush toward each other. That part matters. There was no dramatic confession, no moment where everything clicked into certainty. We talked in fragments, short conversations, unfinished thoughts, pauses that carried more weight than answers. Once, sitting beside me on a bench between classes, she said quietly, "I don't know what happens next." I looked at her and realized something dangerous. Neither did I. And for the first time in my life, that didn't feel like failure. Time passed. The clips stopped circulating. New scandals replaced ours. Aldridge found something else to obsess over. But the shift remained. The rivalry no longer felt inevitable, just inherited. And inheritance, I learned, could be questioned or rejected entirely. One afternoon, months later, I caught my reflection in a window while crossing campus. Shoulders back, pace steady. Not rushing to disappear. I barely recognized myself. Not because I'd become someone else, but because I'd stopped making myself smaller to survive. That kiss didn't change my life because it was romantic. It changed my life because it forced me to confront something I'd spent years avoiding. Visibility. Risk. The cost of pretending something doesn't matter. Some performances expose more truth than honesty ever could. Not every fake moment stays fake. Not every risk is meant to be controlled. And sometimes, what begins as spectacle doesn't end as a lesson. It becomes a beginning you haven't decided how to face yet. Because the truth is, Vera and I never talked about what that kiss meant. We only acknowledged that it couldn't be undone. And some nights, when I pass her on campus and our eyes meet just long enough to reopen the question, I wonder if the hardest part wasn't crossing the line. It was realizing that whatever comes next won't be pretend. So let me ask you this. If something real starts by accident and stopping it would be safer, do you choose safety? Or do you let it pull you forward and risk finding out what it was always leading to?